Hey, Patrick.
Nice to see you, Jack.
Nice to see you, mate. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
So you're in Istanbul now, is that right?
I am, yeah.
It's hard to keep track of you.
I know. Unfortunately, I think that the travels are gonna, I wouldn't say end, but probably go on a little hiatus here because our families are just kind of with the war and everything freaked out about us getting home and all that stuff. So I think we'll probably spend another week in Turkey and go to the center of the country, and then we'll probably head back to like our corner of the world. So
Mm.
for
Okay,
now.
well, yeah, I mean, we can go to another part of the world. Keep going, go
Yeah,
somewhere else.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we'll just then go to Asia from the other side of the world and, all that sort of stuff, or go to South America or something. So,
Oh, okay. So you've not lost, the bug is the thirst has not been quenched.
oh no, I mean, I would like to at least go to like India, Thailand, and Vietnam.
Okay.
And I think if I go to those places, then I'll at least for now kind of be like, oh, okay, cool. And I'm ready to like, be in a home or be centered for a while, like in a stable place. So,
So where have you been on this trip? Because you were in Serbia last time I spoke to you, I think.
oh, Croatia.
Croatia. Oh,
I think, yeah, yeah, we were in Croatia. Croatia, let's see, before this, Budapest, Croatia. In Italy, we went to Florence and then Rome and then Madrid. And then she took me all over Mexico where she's from, Mexico City, which was awesome. So we went to like San Miguel de Allende and then like the state and then the city of Oaxaca, which is like on the western coast of the country. And that place is like incredible.
mm.
It was amazing. Have you ever been down there?
Oh, I haven't never been to South America.
Oh, okay. Or is that was I mean, Mexico's in a little north of that, but that was amazing. Yeah.
Mm. So this is your partner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my yeah, my story is kind of crazy. Almost a year ago, had a sudden breakup with my fiance and definitely was not aiming to or planning to get into a serious thing soon after. But you hear about these things and it is kind of common. I met her 3 months after in Mexico. That's like where I started my, what in the world am I doing with my life now phase of my life. And so I met her and it was just one of those things where I was like, um, I don't know, like, I love her to death and like, I'm just blown away and I don't want to miss this opportunity. And I know I would if I was kind of like, oh, I need a year to heal or I need like,
Mm.
everything. So it's, yeah, I mean, it has its own complications and its own issues, but like, it's also, in my opinion, completely worth it. And yeah, she's like a stellar human being and a stellar partner. And yeah, she's wonderful.
So you whisked her off to Europe straight away.
I mean, it was crazy. Like she's a therapist. That's her job. So she can do her sessions online. So she's able to work while we do this.
What kind of therapy?
She does, let's see, I think she does some cognitive behavioral therapy
Oh,
with
there we go.
the stuff that I'm doing and some other stuff too that I'm not really sure, like some trauma based like therapy stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's awesome. And
She should
I'm
be on the call as well.
yeah, I know. Miriam, come on, Miriam. Her name is Miriam. Yeah, but like that's been totally interesting. And I think just a person willing to be like, sure, I'll travel around the world with you, like last minute, like that is I think a situation like that is either going to succeed and
Mm.
be just work for the two people, or it's gonna fail spectacularly. And we're 4 or 5 months and like we've been dating for almost 8 months. But we've been doing the travel thing for like, 5 or 6 months. And I mean it's going really smoothly. So
Mm.
what can I say? I mean, I'm super grateful for that. And I think people think that the travel stuff is easy or like a vacation. And I don't want to sound like a spoiled brat here because like it is just a massive privilege to be able to do this, but it's definitely not easy. Like there's tons of stresses and uncertainty and discomfort sometimes and just kind of like, anxiety about what you're going to do and where you're going to go. And I think all these things that would stress a couple. And so it's kind of cool experiencing those things and being able to like be like a good team and figure out how to work together. And so I think it bodes well for the relationship personally.
Oh,
But
100% behind you. I met my girlfriend on tour, traveling, holiday, call it what you will.
yeah.
And that was 11 years ago. We're still together. Yeah.
So you were touring from the UK to Italy and then you just got smitten?
No, we were in New Zealand.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jeez. Wait. Okay. So she was coming from Italy in New Zealand and
Yeah. She wanted to learn English. She didn't speak English. So she went to New Zealand
oh man.
after university. She finished her exams and I was doing it like you. I was doing a 2 year. I'd also just broken up with my partner before and I was doing a travel. So yeah, I was doing
You get it.
yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So a house concert travel tour, bicycle tour, and we met in New Zealand and did a month around there by bike, and then went around Australia, and then also across to Bali, bought a tandem,
Wow.
cycled up through Indonesia, over to Malaysia, then back up through Thailand, back
Mhm.
down again. So
Oh,
all by land, and that was 8 months. I hear you what you're saying about it is stressful. It is you're tested in the fires because yeah, you're really finding your every day is so different. We were traveling
yeah.
every day, and yeah, you condense a relationship down into this. It could be it's equivalent of 10 years. Those 8 months together
Yeah. Yeah,
in
for sure.
terms of experience.
In the beginning, I was just like, okay, I feel very deeply for this person. I'm a mess. Like I'm just like a big, just unsettled human being right now. And I was like, she's awesome. And if she's willing to try, that's great. And we'll see how it works. And now I'm just like, oh crap, like it's like really working. I'm like, and now like I have to think about stuff like, okay, if we're gonna move it forward, what does that mean? What are we gonna do? Like as far as like, you know,
Mhm.
buying a home and coming from different countries, like making those choices, which you've made too,
Mhm.
obviously. So yeah, but I'm super grateful. And I know for me, my big thing was like, if this is going to, delay my healing and my like recovery as a human being after like the grief and stuff from the breakup, like then obviously if it's going to hinder me, like this it needs to stop or be delayed or something like that. Like we don't need to be together right now. But she's helped and
She's a
provide.
therapist. You're traveling around with a therapist.
I know. Sometimes we talk and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, don't go into just therapy mode. I'm like, I don't know. She says her boundaries are really strong as far as that stuff goes. But she's been a massive help and just has a lot of emotional intelligence and empathy. And so very
But
lucky.
doesn't everyone who go into therapy have bad experience of their own?
Oh, I don't know, maybe. Yeah. Probably.
Because I was listening about Paul Gilbert and he had depression at 20 and yeah, because he went to boarding school and
Wow.
his father was in the RAF and after the war had a lot of problems and
Wow.
so yeah.
But I mean, that's like amazing to go through all the things he's gone through and just respond by, devoting your life to understanding compassion and helping people receive and give it. I mean, that's really special.
Well, if you go to a sex therapist, you don't want to go to a virgin. You want somebody you want somebody who's seen the dark side, who knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, for sure. Um, I think
But
actually that's kind of, or no, go ahead. What were you going to say?
what did your girlfriend think about? Because your breakup album, like my girlfriend doesn't like me singing songs about ex girlfriends.
Yeah.
And it's my catalog. It's I wonder if the big artists get this problem. I'm sorry, guys, I can't play that song anymore. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. She again just, super supportive. And I think if we had a relationship where I wasn't able to talk about or emote about or express the past, this thing would have would have crashed and burned in the first week.
Mm.
I mean, there's times where I just had to literally weep. I mean, like I think I know you have a broad listenership and some people are listening right now and they get it. Like if if somebody just suddenly left your life, whether they passed away
Mm,
whether they chose to leave, whether you had to leave them, like something like that. It's just I've never experienced anything like it. It is just a grinding pain that you just cannot believe if you haven't been in that position. Where literally like nothing's going to be the same, and that that lack of sameness. The good thing is that you get to have control over that as the person, and it doesn't mean that you're ignoring the pain or something like that, but you can literally can make it just make the change into something good, because you're going to change either way, and you can change into um a depressed, stagnant mess for the rest of your life. Um, and you can justify why you feel like that and why you can't be happy, or you can literally just be like, have like almost a defiant attitude about it. Like, I will just somehow make something good out of this. And for me, I don't want to put all that goodness on, oh, cool, I found a great partner that I'm probably going to end up with, or I hope I end up with. And that represents the good change. Like, it's not, that's like the bonus of all bonuses. But like the real change for me has been just like, uh, probably, I mean, just setting up the conversation for the compassion thing. Like, it for me, it's so much pain and it's so much just grief that like my usual patterns of maybe being combative or like having conflict, like I just can't. I don't have the energy to do that. And so I have to forgive, because I have to move on. And that lets me forgive myself. It lets me forgive all the wounds that I've ever had. Because they say when you experience a grief, you're not just feeling the pain of the current grief, it's like all your grief. So, hey, maybe a lot of it has to do with like how I was estranged with my dad and things like that. And maybe I can forgive him. Maybe I can forgive, an old friend or an old bandmate or something like that, where we've had friction or flaws or something like that. And that's to me the greatest thing, because like life truly is short. And if you spend it in sort of like bitter rumination or just competition, or just, you know, by like giving energy to all these things that ultimately just don't serve you. Um, it's just, it's really just a life where you're not finding your potential, I guess, or your own peace or happiness. So yeah, for that, those have been just some of the biggest things for me. And I'm not even a year out, but I already just know I'm like, okay, cool. Like this, like my life exploded, and now it's just set me on this course to be at peace. And that's the biggest gift of my life for sure.
wow. That's interesting what you said about it being the culmination, or it's kind of are you saying that's like the straw that broke the camel's back? And you had all these other traumas in the past, and this, the kind of, you you suffered them all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think when you go, I mean, because my old partner and I like had our issues or whatever, but she was my best friend. And I mean, we were just so close for 7 years, and it's so funny. But like I was the kind of guy where I would watch movies about, and this is just such a common thing, but like one partner being oblivious to just some of the issues, or just some like the unhappiness of the other partner, and it all falls apart, and then the surprise and the shock. And I would literally be like, oh, that's not going to be me. Like the hubris and the pride of that. And now I look back and recognize that as like probably some depression, some like numbness to stay in the relationship and stay in the dynamic, because it wasn't working. But it for me, and I know everybody experiences grief differently, it was such a shock. It was such a being thrown out of my life against my will or against my knowledge, that it just like everything has to change. And so then you have to face uh just literally everything you've gone through and everything you've been. And to me I mean it's a good thing, because like those, it's kind of like living half of a life almost to a degree, when you're like really not showing up enough to like face the anxiety or the trauma or the depression, or how you grew up, or, a bad relationship with your family, or a bad relationship with yourself. And so I mean, when, when shit hits the fan so profoundly, and just like you literally have to start over, like the house is destroyed, then you could build a better one.
Mhm.
And so for me, like it just had to just all fall apart.
So is that cliche true that like a year on that it was for the best?
Man, I hated that in the beginning because everybody's like, this, this is the best thing that ever happens to you. And I actually sadly have a friend who, I mean, it's not the same situation, but I think it's not developed yet, but it sounds like it's not good for his relationship. And I'm just very cautious to say things like that. But I do want to just be like, hey, you deserve a lot of happiness. You deserve a lot of stability and peace. And if you're not getting that right now, like, like I know you're in for a major change and it's really hard, but like you can thrive through this, but it has to be a choice too. You do have to have some tenacity and defiance to be like, oh my Lord, like I feel worse than I thought a human being could ever feel. Like, how can I, how could I somehow like eke out some good out of this? And, yeah, I hated that in the beginning too. And also because I think, pe- um, we're just a very, we're like a society all around the world based around like, what can I get out of this? What can I, someone broke your heart. Like, what can you get out of it? And that feels just kind of gross. But, if you can do that in a tactful way that like, that serves your life and that's authentic, I think that's good. But God, it's just for me, and now you're so far removed from, I don't know what your situation was like, your breakup, but you're so far removed from it. It's interesting because I meet people who've been in similar situations. Like I remember when I was selling stuff to like sell my house that my old partner and I lived in, and just, nightmare scenario, just like so sad, like selling off things that like were both of ours or that we shared and all these memories. And one guy bought a travel trailer that we'd like traveled in together, and like he's like, so why are you selling this? And I told him the story, and like you could see in his face like he just recognized the, like a war veteran almost. Like he's like, oh,
Mhm.
like, you know, and then he's like, yeah, something similar happened to me. And but I'm just wondering how, because for me, almost a year later, like I'm still sort of like, everything's just very intense still, like intense emotionally, and even the highs are very intense and the lows are still really low. So I just wonder when that kind of like levels out for a person,
Mhm.
like you start to just sort of feel like a normal, here I am in the world, like sense again.
Yeah, well, in our breakup, I left. So
Yeah.
yeah, I did the leaving. So I was the bad guy in that one. But yeah, I mean, it's always, she went to move to Finland and she's very happy as well. So
Yeah.
I
That's,
think we're not really in contact, but
and there's, truly there's no good or bad guy, I think, with it. I think there are kind ways to break the news, or to like maybe like, initiate that process. And there's lesser kind ways.
yeah.
And for me, as the dude who was left, I have tons of regrets. Like I wish I could be the person now with all the knowledge and the insight to get that news. And I think I would have handled things in a much different, much more controlled way. But I also, again, going back to the compassion thing, when you just literally your life just, y- you know, uh, sometimes, sometimes it's just a mess, and it just has to be, and you have to be like, I handled that mess, to the best of my ability at the time, which is true. And the best of it was not, great at all times, but
You've learned so much. Could you be a breakup specialist now?
oh man, gosh. I mean, I think I told you I'm documenting my like travels and my show, my YouTube series, Super Happiness. I don't think it's a breakup specialist thing. I think it's more of a is it okay to curse on here a
Of
little bit?
course.
Okay. So I haven't made this episode yet, but like when I was in Italy, like it was interesting because like they say that grief recovery is like a lightning bolt, like as far as like, hey, you're gonna do better, and then like, oh, like you go down and then you go back up and then you go down. And I started that episode that I have not made yet, being like, hey, if you want tips for like travel tips for like Rome or Florence, like this is not the show for you. But like, if your life just shit its pants and you just don't know like what to do next, like this is the show for you. You should watch this. So I would, I would very untactfully describe what, at least the advice or like just kind of candid viewpoint about dealing with this stuff. Cause yeah, it's just very, very difficult.
Yeah, but when we're about to speak to a world expert in compassion, he's such a. I mean, I've been listening to him, and
Yeah,
he's such a respected guy, such a wealth of knowledge.
for sure. And I want to save it a little bit for when we chat with him, but I just think I'm already seeing a lot of the compassion stuff differently just from hearing how he talks about it.
Yeah,
Um Even things like depression, like something like depression where you think that like this is like a human flaw. Like how could this thing exist? Like this is like an illness, and like how he describes it or how he interprets it is just really fascinating
yeah,
because it still sucks. But then when you kind of like see maybe that there's like a biological like function to it, it really like reframes it.
yeah. Because
Makes
he spent so much time in with severely acute, severely poorly people in hospital wards, and yeah, just listening to his voice, you can tell that he just oozes compassion. He's just been doing this for so long. I just even just his voice, let alone his words, really relaxed me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I know that I was listening to The Compassionate Mind, like his big book. And I know that one's narrated by somebody different. So I'm excited to hear what his actual voice sounds like.
He didn't do it himself. No,
No, I think he was an actor.
no, that's strange. He would do it really well. Yeah, yeah. But what aspects of compassion do help you in your
I
journey?
think the biggest thing, so I grew up really religious, you know, like in a very like serious youth group um and everything like that. And so I think when you and now I'm not. And when
Which religion was it? Did you?
oh boy, this is like a whole can of worms. So my parents split up when I was little. My dad was Catholic, my mom was Mormon, and so they would like take us to different churches every weekend, which is great for children, really. And then when I got older, I just in my rebellious phase kind of went to the neighborhood church, which was like evangelical. So split the difference and was just evangelical.
To rebel.
Yeah. And then it got really into that, like, and it was just a very intense church that was just very like, I think kind of like, sort of like promoted like a self-hating sort of,
Oh my God. This is the
well, and
opposite
like,
of compassion.
yeah, yeah. And actually it's interesting that cause like I want to talk to him about this. His whole thing is that, okay, we are just very brilliant animals that evolved to be like this stuff, to basically have, you know, just intensely complicated emotional brains. And that like leads us to have like all sorts of like benefits and drawbacks as people. And he's saying we didn't choose to be here. So we're just, I mean, I hate this word, but like we're like accidental even. Um, like we evolved to be like this, like we were not planned. And that to me is in direct contrast with, I think, how society views people, which is that I think there's this leftover idea that like we were made in the image of God, and that we are just, and that we're just messed up. Like we're just always like shitty versions of God, that we're just never going to really add up, or be good enough to be like, to be, you know, without sin or without error. And so those two things are very different. Realizing like one just really holds us up to this high standard as far as like we should be, we need to be perfect and we're never going to get there. And so therefore we can just always sort of like be bitter with ourselves or angry or judgmental. And the other one is just very scientific and matter of fact, saying, no, like who you are really depends on your, you know, your family, like what part of the world you grew up, what economic status you have, what race you are. And to his point where he talks all about this in the book, what sort of, um, like care you received as a child. And those couple years in the beginning just will form your whole life. Or maybe not your whole life, but so much about you, so much about your identity and your decisions. And so those two ideas are just very different. And even though now I'm not religious, I still, I think up until recently have really held the belief of like, still probably the former one, like, oh yeah, we're just myself, like we're just kind of like bad knockoff versions of God. And so therefore like are always like striving to to be perfect and never getting there. So I like his broad view of humanity. I think that's like really helpful.
Okay, well, here he is. You can ask him yourself.
There we go.
Hello, Dr. Gilbert.
Jack. Hello, Jack. Hi. Sorry, get myself organized. Right. Okay, so here we are. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
Oh, good.
This is Patrick. He's in Istanbul.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Gilbert.
Wow, Istanbul, man.
Yeah, I'm on kind of a crazy journey after a big life change. I've just gone all over the world, and this is my most recent stop. So I've been here for a week, and this is already one of my favorite cities in the world for sure.
If you can drive.
It's interesting. We were me and my girlfriend. We were staying on the European side, and the other day I tried to walk to the Asian side over the bridge, only to get to the bridge and realize that they don't let people walk over it anymore. So yeah, it takes a long taxi ride to get from where we are over to the Asia side, but we did that and it was amazing.
Yeah, we would been there a couple of times. It's kind of weird. Have you been to the markets and smoked the hat proper?
I haven't I haven't smoked anything yet, but I probably will. But yeah, the markets are incredible.
Completely lost them. Anyway, wonderful. That's great, Patrick. So yeah, wow, fantastic.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, and thank you for speaking to us both today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And it looks like he can play the backing guitar as well.
Actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to start instead of with a question, but just more of a comment. So I'm reading The Compassionate Mind, and even before you mention in the book that when you were younger, you were an aspiring rock guitarist, you can just tell how much you bring up music, how much it means to you,
Oh,
or how much it meant to you when you were young.
right.
And in the book, you were saying that, oh, you gave up the guitar and instead pursued psychology and everything. And I kept being in my head. I mean, I was a music teacher for a long time and everything. And I was disappointed, but now I'm very happy because, you posted your music on your site, meaning you did not give up. You kept going.
Just give up wanting to be famous in a band.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just wanted to say, I mean, in relating this to compassion, like I think compassion takes a lot of flexibility, like looking at issues from different angles and, taking on different perspectives. And I think music is the same way. Like if you wanted to be a rock guitarist, it's a very narrow thing compared to, hey, what if you produced music? What if you sang? What if you wrote lyrics? What if you, got a synthesizer and created, interesting electronic music and everything like that? Because music is so broad. And you can do anything you want. And it sounds like you have. I mean, I listened to your music and it's great. And it sounds like you didn't, you adapted your passion to do different things in music instead of just the one narrow goal, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we've got a study coming up looking at a piece of music by Thomas Ferguson as a compassionate energizing meditation. So I'm just turning that off. Actually, that's my email pinging. Let me just turn that off so they don't want that to be.
No worries.
Great.
So you also did a song with Dennis Church as well. I had him on another episode.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. Yeah, we did. While I was in New York, we put together this piece.
He said we had to interview you. You're the godfather of compassion.
I'm not sure about that. But yeah, that's great. It's fantastic. So yeah, so where's this go to then? It goes all over the place, is it?
Oh yeah. We release on the episode goes out on all the podcast channels and on YouTube. And then the song goes at the end of the episode. And also we release it as a single and with a music video. So it's going to be everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
There we are.
But first, we need the inspiration.
Okay. I didn't make it as a pop star, but now you're going to make me one of these. So you can't have any more. That's great. That's fantastic. So when are you coming back to the UK then, Patrick?
Well, actually, I'm from the United States. And so I will, let's see, we were planning to be out a little bit longer, but I think with all of the uncertainty with the war going on right now, both of our families have just sort of been like, hey, when are you coming home? Can you come home now? And I think,
Yeah, worried about you, I think.
yeah, I think we're going to cut this part of the trip off a little early and come back to the United States. And my girlfriend's actually from Mexico City, so she'll visit with me in the United States for a bit, and we'll do some traveling.
And you're in India, Australia, are you going around?
Those are also what I'd like to go to for sure.
Well, I have some colleagues in Australia, in Brisbane, so let me know. Yes, he's a guitar player as well. So,
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah,
A global band. Wow.
yeah. Hopefully later this year, depending on some factors. But that would be great. But we were just talking about though. So again, with the curious mind, I think one of the biggest takeaways, at least for me in the book, is just your broad view of compassion is that humanity didn't ask to be here. We didn't ask to arrive on Earth or be people. We just sort of find ourselves here. And I think this point is it's really profound and interesting. And I wanted, I grew up in a religious household, just kind of with a very strict religious past, and I'm not anymore. But I was telling Jack that I see the remnants of this belief that we are made in the image of God, and that we just will never measure up. And I see that just sort of like as a broad societal belief that we just all that's kind of the default belief. And it's very different than what you're saying. And so I think even before you get to the compassion part for people or ourselves, I think this is something really interesting to sort of untangle. And I wanted to ask, did you grow up in a religious household, or were you always kind of more of a scientifically minded person?
No, I grew up in a religious household, and I was actually born in Africa and grew up there for a bit. We went to Nigeria because my father was in the RAF. So after the war, he was quite traumatized. So he decided he didn't want to stay in war-torn Europe. He'd seen enough of it. And so off we went. So I was born there. In the 50s in Nigeria, it was full of American missionary schools, Texans. So, I believe in God. I believe in the Bible. So I got sort of saved in that. And then I came back to British boarding school, and that's pretty religious. You had to go to church every week. We had assembly and all the useful things. My parents were pretty religious. They believed that God had these secret plans. And then I came across the evolution, and I thought, that's fucking ridiculous. Nuts. And then I started to look at all the different concepts, religions, and the Aztec gods. They believed that the gods had given them life, but they had to sacrifice their own children. And then you've got the Roman gods and so on. Then you begin to think, well, so what is the psychology of creating gods then? And it's partly a defense against the fear of annihilation and all that stuff. So I went down that route. But however, there is a much deeper spiritual tradition underneath that, which probably knows, of course, the Buddhist position, because the great interesting thing about everything is the nature of consciousness. That is the big one that nobody really understands. And to what extent can consciousness exist outside the body? There's some very interesting studies going on now. So consciousness, so you can have the concept of consciousness and the nature of time and all that rest of it, without necessarily having a creator. So you can have a spirituality, but you don't need a creator with intention. Once you introduce an intentional being that creates, then you've got trouble. But when you just see it as a process of the universe itself, then it gets much more interesting.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. Just because I think, when you think about compassion for yourself or for somebody else, when you start from the starting point of I'm just this flawed being that can never be good enough, like you're already at a deficit or you're already kind of like at a loss compared to if you just say, well, you know, the real truth of it is that like we did not ask to be here. Like we just find ourselves here and like we are doing our best with like what we have, like with our, the way we grew up, the way like the beliefs we hold about life, the way, and like to your point, towards the whole book, like to how like specifically how we were raised, like the care that we received as kids, which I think there's like the pop psychology view of it of like, oh, I had a rough childhood or a good childhood. And like you're pinpointing on these like specific things that are indicative of like how a person thrives or is neglected as a kid and how as an adult, like that doesn't go away. Like that's the framework we're given. And that can't be ignored when you think about compassion.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, you've done brilliantly well. I mean, that's absolutely you've taken those key messages, which is a delight for me, because that's the idea, isn't it? People get liberated from the fear of all these different things they're frightened of, but then recognize that they have opportunities to make themselves and the world a better place.
Yeah. And at least, I mean, just at least some insight to the suffering. Because we can't, a lot of the times we're powerless against that, but the understanding I think helps.
Mm.
Especially with things like Ukraine right now, Ukraine and Russia. Just, thinking about it from a different angle, or even instead of, just not really understanding like what's happening, like on a broad level, like zooming in and thinking about maybe the tribalism aspect of things,
That's right.
which, yeah, that's fascinating. I was going to say how would you define, compassion-based therapy?
So, okay. Are you recording now? You're recording it. Yeah. You're recording now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So I didn't realize you were recording. I'm so sorry. Okay. Right. So compassion-based therapy, two things really to clarify. Firstly is the idea of what compassion is. And there are many definitions about that, but it kind of, we think it evolved from caring behavior, the way in which parents evolved to look after their children, like infants. So turtles don't have anyone to look after them. So when they're born, they're basically on their own, and you have to create hundreds of them, and only a few percent of them survive. But then evolution came up with caring behavior, where in fact the parent protects the infant and feeds it. So the infant doesn't need to protect itself, nor does it need to feed itself. But that's quite fundamental. And what that means is that brains are evolving that are capable of being sensitive to distress and need and responding to it. And equally, infants are responding brains that can be sensitive to receiving care. So the evolution of caring is quite a big deal in terms of the evolutionary trajectory. So you've got this capacity to be sensitive to need and suffering, and the ability then to do something about it. And that has become a very major motivation now in all kinds of relationships, where we can be sensitive to the needs of people we care about and like, and our friends. And if they're in trouble, we want to do something about it. So that's how we define compassion. And it's called an algorithm. What is an algorithm? An algorithm is if A, do B. So your central heating, for example, is an algorithm. If the temperature goes too high, the heating goes up. If it goes too low, the heating comes on. And all it needs is what is called a feature detector for temperature. If it's got that, then it can turn the boiler on or off. So you need a feature detector, which is a stimulus detector. So if you think about threat, for example, then for that algorithm's work, all you need is to be able to detect the threat, and then part of your brain kicks up and you run away. If on the other hand, you see it's food, you need to be able to detect, oh, that's food. It's not concrete, that's food. And then your brain kicks in and you stimulate your surrounding. If it's a sexual signal, you see the sexual signal, the signal is received in the brain, and then the brain creates arousal. And at this time of the year, all the pigeons on my lawn are doing their courting dances, because they're trying to send signals that will stimulate sexual arousal in the female state. But I've tried it with my wife; it doesn't work. So think about that. So that's important. So we've got this issue that you have a stimulus, which then triggers a set of sequences. Not only that, but we now know that that stimulus detection, that ability to pay attention, to notice, to become empathically aware of suffering, and the triggering of a response, there's a physiology behind that. This is related to neurocircuits in your brain. It's related to a hormone called oxytocin. So, for example, people who don't have much oxytocin, they're not so sensitive or interested in helping others than those who do. It's a little bit crude, but there we go. So compassion then can be defined as a sensitivity to suffering, the self and others. That's the first part, that you engage it. You don't turn away, you don't dissociate. You don't say, oh, I'm so glad you're suffering because I hate you. You don't do that. And the next part is then being triggered into behavior. And what's interesting is that a lot of compassion also depends upon context. For example, the compassion of a firefighter who risks their lives to save you, that's a very particular kind of compassion. They're very sensitive. They don't want to see you burn, obviously, and they want to help you. But they may not make the most compassionate parent, because that might not be where their compassionate skill is. Okay. Somebody who's very good at fighting injustice, like Martin Luther King, for example, or whatever, they might not make the best firefighters. So the other thing to think about compassion is that although we can have this definition that compassion is being sensitive and being interested in the suffering and needs of others and wanting to do something better, there can be different areas where people are good at some aspects of compassion, but not all. And the last part I'll say before I talk about the therapy is that compassion needs courage and wisdom, because compassion without courage is ineffective, and wisdom without courage can be reckless. The other way around. Anyway, that way. So if I see somebody fall into a fast flowing river and I think, I'm a servant, that's pretty good. So I jump in, but I've got my Wellington boots on and I can't swim. So wisdom in compassion, the dedication to acquire wisdom, which is a Buddhist issue as well, is very, very important. It's not, wisdom is not automatic. If you think about how we came up with vaccines, we had to work to that. We had to study, we had to work out how to create a vaccine. It wasn't just sitting on the shelf. So compassion also involves a dedication to find the wisdom of what will be helpful. And that's very important when it comes to therapy, because it's not always obvious what's going to help us, but we dedicate ourselves to find the wisdom to relieve suffering. So that's how we define it. And you've got to make a distinction between compassion as a motive and the ways of being compassionate, which is being kind or forgiving or assertive. They're not compassionate themselves, they're ways of being compassionate. That's important. And so that clarifies what compassion is. So we can see it's evolved. We can see it's an algorithm. We know that it has a physiology that sits behind it. It gets turned on and off. Different people are good at some aspects of compassion, not necessarily all of them. And finally, then, how can we and why should we use compassion in therapy? Well, one of the reasons is because compassion will structure your brain. I mean, if you're laying in bed, for example, thinking of an argument, what do you think's happening in your brain or in your body, right? If you're laying in bed thinking of something sexual, what do you think happens in your brain? Okay. Your thoughts, your imaginations, what you pay attention to stimulates very specific systems in your brain. If you're laying in bed thinking about your holiday tomorrow, again, completely different set of systems in your brain. So what we know is that when people become distressed or mentally have mental health difficulties, what they tend to think about, what they focus on, what their mind keeps coming back to are things that are very threatening to them or upsetting to them or are a source of loss. So they don't intend for this to happen, but they become caught up in loops with the stimulating processes in the brain that are going to make them stay depressed or stay anxious. So if you imagine you can switch your brain into a compassion focus, right? The compassion motivation and so forth, you're going to start activating different systems in your brain. And so what compassion focus therapy is about is how to stimulate not only your psychology, but also your body and your brain system so that you can then begin to put yourself into a mental state that will allow you to deal with whatever life difficulties you have. If you get stuck in self-criticism, for example, and you're very hard on yourself, that is really going to undermine you big time. You know, it's like trying to run a race, but tying your legs together. It just is not going to help you. So that's how, that's the basic idea of compassion, to switch these mental states, switch motivational states, switch your brain states. And finally, just to mention how we came across it, because I'm probably rabbiting on here. Many years ago, we were using cognitive-based therapies. And in cognitive-based therapies, what you do is you invite people to think about some of the things that are associated with the difficulty. So if it's anxiety, explore some of the thoughts they have about what they're anxious about, you know, dying or whatever. In depression, people often have thoughts about being worthless, no good, and not lovable or hopeless, whatever. So this was one particular person who had been adopted into quite a difficult family and had this very strong feeling that she shouldn't have been born, wasn't really wanted. But she'd had a good relationship and she had some, good relationships with her children. The children doing very well at school. She'd held down a job, so she could do all that stuff. And so I said, okay, look, so you have this idea that you shouldn't have been born, and you're not lovable, you're not competent in anything. And yet, on the other hand, look, you have a husband who cares about you, and you know that. Yes, I know he cares about me. I have children who do very well. Yes, I know that, but it doesn't make any difference. So I said to her, well, okay, so how did you hear it in your mind then? I mean, could you speak out? I don't know why I asked her this. I had no idea. I just didn't know what else to do. I said, speak out these alternative thoughts. How are you hearing them in your mind? And she said, well, as I actually hear them? And I said, yeah, as you actually hear them. And she said, okay. And this is what she said, come on, you're doing cognitive therapy, aren't you? You had a husband who loves you. You got children who are doing well at school. What on earth's the matter with you? Pay attention. You've got everything going for you. I thought, oh my God, where did that come from? She said, yes, I know it's true. I just got to make myself believe it. So what I discovered was that actually a lot of the problems being carried in the emotional channels, particularly the hostility not in the content, the cognitive content and the evidence and all that, but actually in the way that it was being delivered to the self was often contemptuous and hostile. So that was a bit of a shock, really. And I started to explore this with other patients. And another professor, which kind of got me going with this, when you get very depressed, right, you tend to lay in bed and ruminate. So one of the behavioral things for depression is not to lay in bed, to get up and do things. Maybe do a little bit of yoga, a little bit of exercise, stretching in the morning, take a shower, or whatever you can do, because that breaks up these ruminative cycles. So we had this lady, and we said, okay, so when you wake up in the morning, we're going to put a note on the side of your bed. There's a note on the side of your bed to remember this conversation and get out of bed and do some stretches. And is that okay? And then try and feel better, and then make yourself your first cup of tea and so on. Do some behavioral work. So she said, yeah, I can do that. She came back next week and I said, how did it go? She said, oh, it's okay. I said, well, what actually happened then? You're laying in bed, you wake up. She said, yes. I looked at the card and it said, get out of bed and do some stretches. So I thought to myself, come on, you lazy bastard, get out of that. What? Where did that come from? And so starting to realize that underneath all this process was this real underlying sense of hostility and anger with the self and all kinds of stuff. So that was the first thing. The second thing then was beginning to help people to change the toning. Okay, supposing you had a much kinder tone, and supposing there was a part of you that really wanted to support you in getting well, because, depression is a horrible thing, blah, blah, blah. How about that? And they said, no, I'm not doing that. So why didn't you do that? No, that's pathetic. That's soft. That's weak. That's not going to help me. I've never been kind to myself. I can't see the point of it. Nobody's ever been kind to me. So why should I be kind to me? I had that kind of thing, right? So that was interesting. So there was quite a lot of resistance to it, but actually the resistance was also because, which I should have been more aware of, but I wasn't, was that when you open up any motivational system, what will hit you is what's in that system. So for example, if you like holidays, you love holidays, blah, 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 isn't that great? First of all, I use this example because you're still traveling. Let me use another example. Supposing you love cheesecakes, you're really cheesecake. Personally like it. And then one day you have a cheesecake that makes you very, very, or very, very sick. And the next time you see a cheesecake, of course, you're going to get that nausea again. I mean, if you think of your sexual system, if something horrible has happened to you, being raped or something, when you stimulate that emotion system again, that you're going to get hit by the trauma. What's in the system will be the thing that comes up, particularly traumatic things, because they take priority, the traumatic memories. So if you, in your caring system, if you've got a lot of trauma memories of abuse or neglect or whatever it is, then you start the compassion work. What system are you going to open up? Well, you're going to open up the oxytocin beta system. But hang on a minute, there's all these trauma memories in there. Mm-hmm. That then we became aware that it wasn't as simple as simply helping people to, let's be kind to yourself, or let's do X, or let's do Y. But actually we had to really work in a lot of trauma in the care system, because there was a lot of resistance. And when we did that, we ran into a lot of rage and a lot of grief. For some individuals, the level of yearning to be loved, just yearning to be loved, is just unbearable for them. And so they've shut it all down, right? So when you start doing compassion, you think, oh, it's great, people feel better. No, they don't, because the first thing that happens is you take them into some pretty toxic memories and some pretty painful yearnings to be loved and wanted. So that was the third part of compassion-based therapy. We had to then develop therapies to detoxify the caring system and help people do the grieving process. So we're in a little bit of a catch-22, because if you have a compassionate mind that will help you with pain, but on the other hand, to get to a compassionate mind, you're going to work through the pain. So that was a bit tricky.
That actually answers, I think, my next question, which was, you say in your book, like, that treating people, like doing this compassionate work, it actually unlocks often a lot of like pain and grief. And I'm currently doing CBT therapy, for recovering from a very difficult breakup. And one of the tenets of it is, you're often going to feel much worse than you feel before you feel better. And so sort of signing up for some period of just intense pain, grief, depression, numbness. And is it basically, like you said, that kind of going back to this place of of accessing love, like the love is integrated with a memory of abandonment or a memory of neglect or something like that. And that's why, so the two you have to untangle the two.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely correct, Patrick. Yeah. So you have to untangle the two, because if you have a lot of memories, say of your father or mother saying that you're stupid and you're useless and blah, 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 when you begin to get in contact with that part of you that wants to be loved, what happens is all those memories. Yeah, I wanted to be loved, but that's what people who should have loved me told me. They told me I wasn't lovable. That's really how they treated me, as if I'm not worthy to be loved or not worthy to be cared for or protected. So those are very interconnected processes.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I think the method of having people say out loud what they're thinking, it's interesting because you might believe the thought yourself, and then you say it and you're like, oh, well, that's just crazy, or that's just so untrue. I know for me, I journaled this the other day, just realizing oh, well, I have to meet everybody else's needs before I can be loved. Like they're going to give me the love. Like I can't give myself the love. You know what I mean? Like I have to, whether it's my old partner or my family or my friends or somebody at the bus stop, I have to definitely get their approval, or just make sure I'm okay with them and then they'll help me out and give me love and acceptance or affection and everything like that. And you say it and you're like, that is fucking, that's just batshit crazy. It's just completely wrong. But it's hard to just admit it and just say, oh yeah, I legitimately have believed this for a long time. And then once you say it, you can you can start to break it down and break down the belief and change it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. The only thing I would add to the cognitive position is that, we have to understand that the reason that you have that yearning to be loved is not because you have a belief. The belief is the consequence of being a human being who is born needing it, because in our early ancestral life, if you weren't loved, you died. That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
That we are born needing, have motivational systems, we have biological systems that seek out that the desire to be valued, to be loved, to be seen as somebody who's worth something. We're biologically designed for that. So you are pursuing what you're biologically designed to do. Now, of course, the trouble is that if there's been problems along the history so that you haven't quite got a secure sense, then you develop the belief. But the belief is a response to the frustration of the underlying need that you were born with.
Mm. And that's so crazy too, that just those first few years of a child's life, like that's it. That's not it permanently, but like that's where everything is being constructed and formed. And yeah, it's just fascinating to realize that, because then when you have that knowledge, then I think it's easier to change things. It's easier to get out of the cycles or just understand it at least.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you've got different things, isn't it? Your children could grow up needing that actually my needs are met and things are fine. That's one thing. Or I have to work very hard in order to persuade that parent or whoever it is to love me, care about me, is whatever it is. So you go through life, have to work very hard to try and get people to do that. Or you go the other way, was I don't give a toss about anybody. I'm just going to focus on myself because everybody's let me down. So why should I bother about them? Why should I'm just going to do what I want to do for me. So you get these different solutions to the problem of what happened if we weren't loved in the way that we are born to need, right?
Hmm. I was actually mentioning earlier to Jack that I think your views on depression are really interesting. Because I think with anxiety as a society, there's kind of a broad understanding of like, this is like, an evolutionary, like fight or flight sort of system that's put into the modern context. Like, you don't need this system when you're sitting in traffic. You don't need the fight or flight thing to help you survive in a traffic jam. Like, that's just sort of a leftover thing. But for depression, there's kind of a murkier understanding of like what this thing is and why we have it. And I think your explanation that it's actually like, it's not an accident. It's like a function, like an evolutionary function, as far as like, if you're living in the cave and you're abandoned or something like that, you're going to start wailing and freaking out and attract predators. But instead, the depression keeps you quiet. It keeps you sort of sedated. Like, do you think people maybe knowing that would help them, for people who suffer with chronic depression or like, grieving from a loss?
Well, no, it's a great question, Patrick, because I think that people will benefit if they realize that their minds are full of millions of years old little programs, algorithms that they have not chosen. Okay. And those programs are designed to control your mind and your body. That's what they're designed to do. Now, if you think about it, for example, think about your sexual system, right? You see a sexual stimulus. You didn't create the physiological process that suddenly makes you aroused. You didn't create that. Or if you see a threat and your heart rate goes up and you start to feel sick, you didn't create that. It's built into you. What's happened is something has been activated in you. A program has been activated that's now running your brain and your body. Now, when you become mindful and observe it, and you can look in on it, then you can begin to do things about it. You can say, okay, I'm anxious, but I'm not going to act on it, and so on and so on. So the question then is, so what is the program for depression? Well, depression is primarily a shutdown state. And it's not a short-term shutdown state. It's a long-term shutdown state. It's to shut you down for a period of time, to stop you moving. It's particularly, you can be very agitated with depression, of course you can, but it's actually to stop you going out exploring in a confident way. So why would it be useful to stop you exploring in a confident way? Well, it would be useful if out there it's very dangerous. Now, there are three basic models of why we turn on our shutdown mechanisms. And when you do that, what we know is your dopamine goes down, you get changes in your thyroid hormone, all kinds of stuff. So you're getting a physiological shifting of states. Something is shifted in you. And people know that, when they come out of depression, they realize they're in they say, I was in a bad state of mind. Yeah. So you've gone into these bad states of mind. So one of them is called learned helplessness. And this model showed that if you subject animals to stresses they can't control, the first response is to increase activity. The brain does more stuff to try to struggle to get free and so on and so on. But if that doesn't work, then the animal will get exhausted and burnt out and so on. So they go into what is called a helpless passive state, where they stop struggling. They literally give up. And the other interesting thing about that is while you're in that stage, it's very difficult to learn how to escape. So even when the animal could escape, they failed to learn how to escape. So this was regarded that we can learn to be helpless. And when we're helpless, when we've been subjected to stress after stress after stress, we can't do anything about, then the brain just says, okay, that's enough. That's enough, guys. I'm just shutting the whole thing down and you're out of action for a bit. So that's one. Now, another one is the one you were mentioning, which is that in the relationship to attachment, when we're in a connection and we're in a connected relationship, when that relationship breaks, then we have lost something that's quite important to us. So in the case of the mother and the infant, thinking monkeys or whatever, if the infant gets separated from the mother, because they're not like a turtle that can go off and defend themselves, they are totally dependent on the mother for protection. If they get separated from their protector, they're in trouble. So the first thing they have to do is, once again, activate, energize, start searching, crying, calling. Did you say that will then attract predators? So if the mother doesn't return, there is nothing to turn that system off. It's called protest. Okay. And so what happens is, after a period of time, we are programmed that the protest system will turn itself off. Okay. It overheats basically. And so then the infant goes into a shutdown state where they will hide, usually under a bush or wherever, and wait for the parent to find them, because that's their best hope of survival. And many animals can find their offspring by smell. Primates not so much, but other animals can. So we can smell them and so on. So this is a kind of waiting for rescue. So there is an element in depression where people are a little bit hoping that someone will come and rescue them and make them all better. So they can have that sense of yearning for a connectedness that will cure them, that will help them. And we're doing some research on this waiting for rescue. And these individuals, interesting also, they're not so keen on self-help, because the algorithm, that program, is really waiting for a signal to come in and, take them away and make them feel better. So that's important. And that's quite important in the case of attachment loss, where we're in the process of that loss of connection, that loss of whatever it was that was giving you positive emotions or whatever. Now your brain has to readjust to that. And so for a while, it can go into a bit of a shutdown state, and you kind of lose interest and lose enthusiasm for things. Then the third one, which is one of the ones I focused on, is what happens when animals are defeated. They get into fights and they get defeated, or they're in situations where they're being harassed by dominant others. So in a lot of primates, if the subordinates try to get a little uppity, they simply get attacked by the dominant. If they try and have a bit too much sex or take a bit too much food, the dominant will attack them. So we have programs in our minds so that when we feel under certain types of threat, when we've been bullied, for example, in bullied situations, or situations where we can't get away from, again, we can go into these shutdown states. Now, we don't choose that. Okay. They just get triggered in us. Just like if you eat something that's toxic, you'll vomit. Now, you don't choose to vomit. It's a reflex. So like these depressed states, these switching of brain states are just like reflexes. They're just being turned on and turned off by what's happening. And if you've been coming from an environment where as a child you were bullied and so forth, then if you find yourself in a situation where you're being bullied at work, for example, that's a classic trigger. People get depressed quite quickly under those conditions. So that's kind of important. And it's also explains why, if people have high levels of self-criticism, they're running the risk of triggering their own depressions, because they're putting in an attacking signal, you're no good, you're useless, whatever. And the brain will then respond to that. Okay, I'm under attack, so I better go into shutdown. And then they can literally criticize themselves into depression. They can literally turn on their own depression module. Now, the point that you're making, Patrick, is very, very important. When you begin to recognize, actually, these are programs in the brain, like my central heating system and my smoke alarm, they're just getting triggered, right? I've got to stand back from that. But I've got to think about what I want to do, because all of your negative mood states, you don't choose them. We never choose them. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what? I think I'll have a panic attack today because I'm bored, or I think I'll have a rage attack. I'm going to practice. Or I want a suicidal depression. I'm going to go on to a course, how to make myself suicidally depressed. That'd be fun, wouldn't it, right? So everything, like your anxieties and your depressions, you don't choose them. They get turned on in you. And then, so the question is to understand how and why, not to be overabsorbed in them. But if you can then shift into a compassion state, you'll start recharging, reactivating systems in your brain that will turn these shutdown states off.
Yeah. It almost it just struck me when you were saying that there's almost like a breakdown in this sort of thinking between mental health and physical health. Like it really breaks down the barrier between the two.
Very much so. Very much
so. Yeah, that's fascinating. I think to get to a place with compassion, like where you're able to access that, do you think people sort of have to have these big life changes like that I've experienced? Like I don't know if I could have gotten to this state that I'm currently in, which is like truly being able to forgive people, truly being able to like go back into my past and accept things more than I ever have, like kind of a reckoning. Do you think people can get there without sort of getting their asses kicked, like without by life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we can sort of potter along in life and we just live the way we live and nothing much happens really. And, we live out our programs. We don't really think too much about what it is to be a human being. We are born into, the vast majority of humans that have ever existed, that's what's happened for them. They were born, and as you say, nobody chose to be born. I mean, in our therapy, we say to people, how many of you chose to have 2 arms and 2 legs? Put your hands up. No. Okay. How many of you chose to have a brain that sits in your skull? And it's not a terribly good skull, actually, because it's got all ridges. And you could definitely write it. Did you choose that? No. How many of you chose to have a system in your brain that could make you very anxious or very tired or sexual or anxious or joyful? How many chose to have those? Anybody? No, nobody. Okay. So how many chose to be a man or a woman? Okay, nobody. How many chose your ethnicity? Oh, I see, nobody. So, excuse me, what did you choose then? Not a lot. So the point is, we live out consciousness, as it were, sits in this mind and it lives out these dramas that last for 70 years or whatever. And it's been doing that for millions of years, right? We just live it out. We don't really think about it. But the point you're making is very, very important. But sometimes what happens is something hits the system and it shakes it up, right? And then you suddenly become aware of, hang on, I'm in a sort of a dream here. I'm just living out these programs, right? And I'm not really thinking about them or questioning them, but what? Hang on a minute. And so you get a trigger. Now, very often, but not always, the trigger is something that really threatens you or upsets you or throws you into a crisis. And Jung talks a lot about this, that when we're thrown into a crisis, the crisis becomes an opportunity for the reorganization of our lives and a deeper understanding of the nature of what it is to be human. But it is tricky, and it begins the journey of the hero. So in the Jungian traditions, the crisis stimulates a process within you that makes you then wake up or move towards a more enlightened position. Now, of course, it doesn't always do that. It can turn you the other way. It can make you very aggressive. But when you get the crisis, it is a call to wake up. It's to wake up, and you now are in a state of anxiety or depression or whatever it is. And at that point, it's your heroic journey. Okay. And I would see for you taking the journey around the world as an external representation of an archetypal process that's been triggered in you. The hero in you is now starting to think about the nature of your mind, take control of your mind, and come to terms with things in the past, not be, you let go, it's like cutting the balloons that are holding you down, but cutting the ropes that are holding you down, letting them go because you're becoming more aware, more enlightened, right? But these things are not, it's not whether they deserve your forgiveness or not. It's actually you deserve to be freed from it. So you suddenly realize, hang on a minute, we're all here and none of us chose it. My parents didn't choose to be abusers or whatever it is. They've been doing this for millions of years. I gotta let it go. So these are very, very important things because you forgive because you deserve peace and you don't want to be trapped by the poisons of vengeance and anger. You're entitled to them, of course you are, but they are poisons to you. You can be free. You can be free to be the person you want to be.
Well, exactly. And I think if you, I'm trying, this sounds selfish, but it's actually not when you think about it. I'm taking a pretty radical approach of taking care of myself. And if I truly do that, and if I'm truly accountable for my actions and reckoning with my past and reckoning with where I'm at now, forgiveness is the only option. And not just for maybe something that happened during the breakup or my actions or whatever, like all of it, forgiving that partner, forgiving myself, because if I truly love myself and have compassion for myself, like it's like hanging on to acid or something, like it'll just destroy me. So if those are the two options of being eaten alive by acid or just not, I would rather do the other thing. And the interesting thing too, doing the work and thinking about compassion like this too. Um, Again, if you get those thoughts out loud on paper or just say them, you're like, well, I can't forgive this person. Well, why can't you? And it's not that the other person doesn't deserve the forgiveness, but like, I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. This is too much. It's overwhelming and all those things. And then you're like, well, so this has more to do with my deficits than it does with like justice or something like that. And then you're like, no, I can do it. I can somehow manage to do this. Like I can just figure this out and do it. Because of the other option is just ruminating for decades and or whatever, and just being bitter and angry. Like, you know, truly, like if you are selfish in the good way, you're gonna say, no, I like myself too much to just feel horrible any longer than I have to. So forgiveness it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful thing, Patrick. It is. And, I think all, the work that's been done on forgiveness is showing that, you get people forgive for different things. Sometimes people forgive because their religion tells them they should forgive. There was lots of research done with the survivors of the Holocaust. So that's one aspect, but that doesn't tend to work so well. And then there are other people who just won't forgive. And then there are other people who realize that forgiveness is a set of stages, right? Firstly, you acknowledge the rage and the hurt. You've got to process that. You can't use forgiveness just simply to get away from that. You've got to acknowledge, actually, yeah, I'm raging about this and I'm very distressed about this. And when you acknowledge that, then you can say, but because I'm raging and because I'm so distressed, this is why the solution to my rage and my distress is to move towards forgiveness, letting go. You can then move on if you want to think of it as a higher spiritual value or moral value, but the steps are really firstly to acknowledge your own pain and why forgiving will help you, which is what you basically were saying.
Yeah. And this actually leads me to another question I had for you. Or maybe like kind of a grouping of questions. Like when this happened, I researched a lot about grief and about, heartbreak and things like that. And I stumbled upon this idea of basically like, well, really, if you think about it, your brain is just addicted to this person that you loved or the thing that you lost, and it's just a withdrawal. And I was, and sure, it's technically true, but also, I mean, I think people hate that idea for for a good reason, because you're like, oh, I gave my life to this person. They're not an idea. They're like a tangible thing. They were a part of my life. And I guess I just commenting on how that's like an interesting way to process the grief. Again, is by instead of it's thinking you're like maybe something special, like you really are just like an animal. You're an animal with like needs. But also the other thing I wanted to say that I guess, and this is a weird segue, but I'll just get here. Like, is I'm wondering how compassion works with justice in your mind or in your life, like personal justice or accountability or like societal justice, because when you are looking at the world like you do, it's a lot more complex and nuanced than the tribalism that you talk about, or just sort of like someone is good or someone is bad. Like those ideas really start to like deteriorate. Um, but we do need accountability, like in our personal lives and in like the world we live in. Like there should be accountability for what Russia's doing, in my opinion. Something like, zooming out to like a big issue like that. So like, how do you see accountability, and justice, like, interact with like your views of compassion?
Well, again, a great question. So the first thing is why, when we talk about this, it's not your fault. People think, oh, let's study people up the hook. But actually, it's completely the opposite. It's because of understanding that if you don't learn to regulate your mind, you can end up doing some bad things to yourself or others, right? So you need to take responsibility. So we say to people, look, supposing you're driving down the motorway and you get hit by a snowstorm, that's not your fault. You didn't make the snowstorm, I don't know. But what do you do? Oh, well, I have to slow down. I have to drive carefully. Absolutely. Why do you do that? Well, because if I don't, then if I keep driving at 80 kilometers an hour, whatever, I'm going to crash and hurt myself or other people. I see. So you become aware then that actually, even though there are things that you're not responsible for, you have to be responsible in how you work with them. Is that okay? To avoid causing harm, right? So that has to be the key theme in compassion, that we live to be helpful, not harmful, that we want to live to avoid causing harm. And therefore, even though I have a brain that can lead me to be angry and say horrible things, I have to learn how to be responsible for that so I don't act that out. I'm not blaming myself to having it. I didn't choose to have that, but I do, because it's being plumbed in for the very reason that it's being plumbed into me by evolution. That's why, as a human that's conscious and can be aware, I have to take responsibility to make sure it's not damaging. Primate, no other monkey can do that. I can do it because I have a consciousness, right? I can do that. I can pay attention to these programs in my mind and make a decision. I'm not going to do that so that's me taking responsibility. So the next thing is, what about other people? Well, the key thing about other people is when they do harmful things to you, what does it stir up in you? Because if it stirs up rage and violence, then you're back to that problem again. How are you going to regulate that? Otherwise, you're going to act it out in the world. And so the first thing then with people doing bad things is be careful that they don't stimulate the dark side in you. Okay, so the dark side in you will be wanting vengeance and harming and getting your own back and all the rest of it. So the same thing with what's happening now in Russia. We've got to be very careful that we don't just get stimulated into rage and wanting to make these people pay, and they're all bastards and blah, 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 blah. Evil empire, all that stuff. That is not helpful psychology, but it's absolutely essential that we do everything we can to stop people being harmful. There's no question about that. That's why a compassionate society has a good police force. Ideally, they don't need to be used too much, but a police force is very, very important for a civil society. The rule of law is extremely important for a civil society. It has to be fair. That's the compassionate part of it. And it has to be agreed. That's the compassionate part of it. But it has to be there because we know that through no fault of their own, some people will get up to bad stuff. I mean, the day they were born, they didn't say, oh, you know what? I could be a wonderful doctor, but no, I'm going to be a criminal. So we're not blaming them, but nevertheless, society, we have to be clear that we can do everything we can for those individuals who do have minds that are oriented to the harmful. We can kind of try and stop them, and if possible, obviously change them. So that's important. But then you come into this more serious issue. Well, I say it's not a serious issue. What do we do with these aggressive males who get power and then are very damaging? Well, the fact of the matter is they've been doing this for thousands of years. For thousands of years, if you look at all of the major empires, from the Egyptians. Was watching the documentary on the Hittites the other day. God, they were vicious. They were a vicious group. All dominant male, obey the dominant male. If you look at the Second World War, you had Stalin, you had Hitler, you had Mussolini, all of these guys, dominant, aggressive males. Okay. And they have absolutely screwed human history, screwed it to the ground. You know, you look at the Romans, just horrendous, actually. So, and we got another one. So the question is then how do we deal with that? And we've got to not only think about the now, what's the best way of dealing with it now, because we know that the vast majority of humans in the world, left to their own devices, are peaceful. They don't want war. They want to go home to their kids at night, have a bit of fun and play a bit of football, whatever. The vast majority of people are not interested in war, but they can be stimulated to be interested in war, particularly if you start selling the messages, you know, we need to be great. And I would say to everybody, once you hear a politician or somebody in religious saying, we will make you great, you run exactly in the opposite direction. You do not want to be made great. Wise, courageous, and fair, that's good. That's okay. But if you're going to be great, you're going to have to be greater than somebody else. And now you're in trouble. So what we need to do then is to recognize that the working with these aggressive males who get into positions of power and are then very, very damaging, partly due to hubris, partly due to other things for whatever, are tricky. And they've always been very tricky. And we haven't yet got clear ways of preventing them getting power, even in democracies, as you know, these aggressive males can get into positions of power. So that is a big issue about how all of us take responsibility for thinking carefully about the way we are led, what messages we allow to influence us, be it on the social media, what is being stimulated in us, is what's being stimulated in us, is it saying that moves us towards the helpful, or is it saying that moves us towards into different ways? So that's the way I see it. And to keep in mind that, you know, as awful as what's going on, there are many people in Russia who are protesting and risking their lives and so on and so on. So always pay attention to the helpful, because it's easy to be sucked into the bad. Yes, this is bad, and it's huge tragedy, and we have to do everything we can to stop it. Of course we do. But the next question is, how are we going to deal with the aftermath? How are we going to repair relationships as quickly as possible, right? Like after the Second World War, you know, we had the Marshall Plan and everything. We repaired, you know, by the middle of the 1950s, by within 10 years, I mean, we had repaired a lot of that psychological damage, and not all of it, South Africa and other places. So we need to be compassionately thinking about the post-Putin years, right? How are we going to repair it? How are we going to, we don't want us to be enemy. We don't want another Cold War. We don't want any kind. We want to find a way of living together, right? That's the key thing. Regardless of our difference, it has to be the key thing. How can we live together and stop all this mutual threatening each other? I need to be bigger than you in order to feel safe. So those are key things within compassion, right? Of actually taking the courage and wisdom to create a world where people can feel safe without them having to threaten each other with bigger weapons than you.
Yeah,
Beautifully said. Yeah.
definitely. There's, I don't know how much time we have, but there's so much in that I could unpack, like even about your ideas about like a police force. I think in the United States, it's just a massive debate and a massive issue because we have, in my opinion, like an overzealous, like poorly trained, like police force. And you have like innocent Black people being killed like over and over and over and over again. And, of course we need police, and of course we need, you see, accountability, justice, safety, security, but that system, at least as it is just, it's working really well for people like me, and it's working really bad for a lot of other people who are, you know, who are Black, who come from different like levels of income and everything. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that.
But I think it's a brilliant, brilliant point you make, right? Because what's happened in these, and you know, we saw it in Germany against the Jewish people, they would just, because they were Jewish, you can pick on people because of their skin or their religion or whatever it is. But the point you make is a really excellent one, is that we're not training these people.
Yeah.
We're simply not, right? Policing, many people go into policing because they genuinely have a view to be protectors. That's what you want. You want men and women who are interested in protectors. Okay. But unfortunately, what happens, you are going to attract people who are interested in the power dynamic and who are going to act out a lot of their trauma stuff, right? So you look at people who've gone into the army, some of these people have been traumatized. If you look at what happened in Iraq and some of the things that happened there. So the profession of policing is a noble profession, a very important profession, but the profession itself has to understand it's being severely corrupted by the psychology of a subgroup of males who get into positions of power and then they contaminate the situation. It's like what's happened in Russia, right? So these dominant males that get into these positions of power, and then they actually pull others in to sort of follow their values. That's a problem, right? And we got it everywhere. You got it in domestic violence, you got it everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's not the process of policing, it's helping to support the traditions of policing that people, we are proud that we don't kill Black people. We are proud that Black people see us as protectors, because if they don't, then we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
It's like going to the doctor. If I won't go to the doctor because I don't trust them not to kill me, that the doctor is useless, right?
Yeah.
So the question that we have is, how can Black people develop trust? And that's the issue right the way through. It's like when we are in the post era of Putin, how are we going to develop some kind of trust? Social trust, social respect has to be at the basis of our human relationships, whether we're in the police, whether we're in the army, whether we're in politics, right? And what's happened in some of our police forces is that their interest in being macho and acting out their own trauma crap, basically, has corrupted the service. We had this whole thing here. We recently lost one of the commissioner of police because it was felt she wasn't dealing correctly with racism. And we had somebody come from the police who say, "Oh, it's just a few bad apples." No, it's not. If you think of the epidemiology, give say 5%, maybe more of your individuals are on the psychopathic dimension, and you're going to get more of those individuals because they'll be attracted to things like the police force. You've got a lot more than a few bad apples. You've got a systemic problem. Not your fault. It's not your fault, right? It's just the way the human brain is. This is what happens in groups. We've seen it for thousands of years. They take personal responsibility as if it's your fault, but it is your responsibility to sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the key issue. Don't be ashamed by it, but see it as a challenge. Wouldn't it be a wonderful challenge if in 20 years' time, any person of any color could look at a police person and think, "I'm so glad you're about it because I feel protected." It's not happening right now, but that would be a compassionate position. That would be saying that if I was in the police, I would say, "That's what I want. That's what I want." That everybody that in my, in this country, we've got some really great things going on as well, where police are working with, people from poverty backgrounds and getting involved in sport and talking to them about crime. Policing can work really well, not if it's corrupted by these macho, aggressive values with people who are actually quite disturbed. And that's why they've gone into the police, because they like all that stuff. But a lot of the police I know, and I work with them, they're basically decent people who want to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
But they get caught up in all this stuff.
For sure.
Could I just jump in with one question that about in all those patients you spoke to about self-compassion versus compassion for other people? Was there a direct correlation that if they didn't have self-compassion, they weren't compassionate for others, or do you ever meet people who had one but not the other?
I think it's true. That's a great question, Jack. Well, look, I don't follow that view at all. This is the idea: if you're not compassionate to yourself, you can't be compassionate to others. I mean, even if you think about it for a moment, it doesn't hold up. I've worked with what is called the Medical Defense Union in this country. These are doctors who are under stress or depressed or whatever. And a lot of them are perfectionistic self-critics. They're very worried about making mistakes, and they struggle a lot, and so on and so on and so on. But they would lay down their lives for you. You know, these are the people who would work on the COVID wards knowing that they had a chance, if they got it, they would die. And they have. Some of our medical staff have died, right? So you can't tell me, oh, these are critical perfectionists. They worry about not being good enough with their patients, therefore they can't be compassionate. That's just wicked. That's cruel. Of course you can't do that. It's like saying to people who are depressed, oh, well, you're self-critical, so you can't be compassionate. That's nonsense. I mean, also on the other end of the spectrum, we've got people who are very compassionate themselves called narcissists, who are absolutely not compassionate to other people at all. So it doesn't add up. No. What is the case, however, is that the more compassionate you are to yourself, the more you understand how to help other people become compassionate. That is true. So simply because, you know, if you can do things for yourself, you're more likely to be able to help other people. But it's, as a general principle, you know, self-critics can be very compassionate to other people.
It's interesting. Yeah. Well, this has been great. Do you have any final thoughts there, Patrick?
I mean, I could probably talk for like 3 or 4 more hours, but I think it's probably a good place to wrap it up. And yeah, just this was amazing. And thank you for both of your time. This is awesome.
No, I think it's great. I mean, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think all of us can realize that we've just landed here with a gene-built body that we never chose. It's designed for reproduction and survival. It's got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of programs in the brain which are not particularly useful. There's been 5 mass extinctions in the last 500 million years. And if any one of those hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here as a species, let alone as individuals. So everything is basically a process of random selection and change. But we do have a capacity to become aware of ourselves, as the Buddhists say. We have this ability to learn to observe the mind and understand what we are, where we've come from, and what it is that we can do to take responsibility for the dark side of our minds and to bring compassion into the world, to live to be helpful, not harmful in whatever we do. And we can focus on that as a life value or life goal. And that's my personal practice. That's my personal practice, is to do that. And as best we can, have fun along the way.
That's wonderful.
Well, it's great inspiration for a song. I've just been writing down some potential song titles. I've got Waiting for Rescue. I thought that had a lot of potential. And The Hero in You, just to get us started.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
The hero. I think because at root, we talk about the courage and the wisdom of compassion. For us, those are the 2 crucial, developing your courage to address suffering, to see the issues, to see the problems, to say, no, I'm not going to turn away from it. And then the preparedness to dedicate yourself to say, I don't quite know the best way to do this, but we can work it out. Yeah, we can work it out.
That's something I really, something from this conversation, both of you said, is I didn't realize how, once you lift a rock up, how there's a lot underneath there and a lot comes out. It's really painful. So
yeah,
that's a big insight.
So Jack, you're that getting to write the song.
Well, together with Patrick.
How great is that?
Yep.
Okay, you're going to do a minor or a major, or when are you going to bad side or slightly on the upbeat side? Or
yeah, yeah.
Are you a major or minor guy, Jack?
Well, it's so funny. Sometimes I write songs in major, and then we take them to the producers, and then I realized afterwards it was a huge mistake because none of the meaning came through. You switch it to minor, just that one simple switch transforms it, and then it really communicates. So yeah, it's a really big decision there.
Yeah. I always have the preference for major keys, but always writing the saddest songs in the major keys because I like to be complicated. So
we use the Thomas Bergerson piece for energizing compassion, which is really quite nice. Do you know Thomas Bergerson?
I don't know.
I checked him out when you were was a Norwegian composer, very epic.
Yeah.
Almost film scores.
Yeah. Does a lot of games. Yeah, it's good.
So that's not going to happen. So we're not.
Oh, no.
It's way above our. We should have got him on the show. If you,
No.
I'm going to
I'm just saying that you're quite right, because compassion is often seen as this but we're very interested in this energizing of compassion. Compassion is a crusade. It's a really way of what you want to bring into the world to see the growth of justice and all that stuff.
So your preference is going to be major.
I think my preference would be, yeah. I mean, if you ask what it'd be, yeah, so it would be, how do we find the hero in us? How do we find that courage? How do we acknowledge that we don't actually have all the answers at the moment? We don't know. We don't know the best way of stopping this war. We don't. But we can all put our heads together and try and work it out. What's the best way to do it with minimizing harm? There's some very interesting things going on in the background, aren't there, with people hacking into the Russian communication system every now, but these oligarchs offering rewards for the arrest of Putin. So there's some very interesting things going on.
But you had a great message that we all have to keep our eye on the pie. We're all going to. This is going to be over one day. We all have to put love into the mix.
Of course.
It's a good point you make that, because you don't need to love people in the sense of the Western view, I love you. You don't need that. Because compassion is really the sensitivity to suffering. In the Buddhist, it's the wish that all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. That is the Buddhist motto. May all sentient beings be free of suffering, the causes of suffering. That's it. You may not like the person who is you wanting to be, but you don't want them to suffer, right? If you, and that's such an important thing. I don't need to like you, but I don't want to wish you harm. And if you are in harm, I will try and help you. Whether I like you or not is another matter. But that desperate wish that it's not right to see you in harm. And I think that's quite an important thing, because people often don't realize that a lot of compassion can be fueled by anger, and it shouldn't be like this. I don't want this to happen. This must not happen. We must stop that. Like you were mentioning, Patrick, about the police have got all caught up in, because racism goes way, back hundreds of years of it. And they've just carried on those traditions. But that real anger, this must not be like this. But you use that anger in a way of really focusing on how do we understand the problem, what are the causes of the problem, because that's often tricky to understand. And then how do we resolve it? And that's not always straightforward either. But it's that, no, I don't want it like this. I don't want to live in a world where this happens. I just don't.
Yeah.
So interesting, because I thought we were going to do a song about the individual, because we've got Patrick on and he has this history, but now it seems we're going more macro. So maybe it has to be.
Yeah. Change the world. Yeah. Compassion will change. Compassion is the most courageous, the wisest of all of our motives that will change the world. If you really put that at the center of everything, how can I be attentive to suffering and do whatever I can to find the ways of stopping and relieving it? If every human being did that, the world would change within a month.
Wow.
That's a lot of pressure on us as songwriters, but
no, you got to do great. You got to do great. That's the thing, right? As opposed to what can I do for me and how can I be strong and how can I be great? Forget all that crap. That's all private stuff. That's, monkey stuff. You don't instant that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great insight. Yeah. Thanks very much. This has been fantastic. I know it won't be.
Very welcome. Yeah. Thank you so much. I do tend to rabbit on, so who hasn't too much?
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, we could keep going, but yeah, you just have to come on again.
Yeah, whenever.
Brilliant.
Take care now then.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
I'll stay on with you for a minute, Patrick, just to talk about the song.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Dr. Gilbert.
Wow, what a guy, eh?
Oh, he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can tell just too, he's just totally genuine, just like a real authentic person who very much believes in what he's saying.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could do his job for so long, listening to such hardships. It's not an ordinary job to do, is it? It's an abnormal job to open yourself up to that.
Oh yeah. It's an immense amount of work, I would imagine. Just tons of energy for communicating and for, yeah, for having the compassion. And actually one of the questions I was going to ask him, but I didn't get to, is that he has a whole thing about, that there's a huge difference between empathy and compassion, because
Oh, yeah?
like you can have empathy for someone, but and do that in a harmful way. Like you can imagine how they feel in order to like attack them or something, or know their weaknesses. So the compassion part comes with empathy, but like a motive to like relieve the suffering or like to help, essentially.
Maybe compassion is also acting. You actually have to do
Yeah.
something, or is that not part of it? I don't.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, yeah, take action, like as far as the different ways you would treat the person or like interact with them.
Mhm. He said something about that it really helped that people didn't choose that. That was a big theme, that you didn't choose. That's a big help. So didn't choose to be born, and it's
Yeah.
the evolutionary psychology. I mean, I come from, I'm coming from more of a spiritual background. If I believe in consciousness, I believe I have a soul,
Hmm.
and so if ipso facto, I believe in reincarnation, and so that I believe my actions predetermine my next life. So that gives me also a reason, gives me a gives me a compass.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I would think that sort of I didn't choose is big, because that's so broad. And then you could apply it to a hardship. You could apply it
Mm.
to like a family in Ukraine not wanting, they didn't choose to be caught up in this war, but also the broader, like nobody chooses how they start, or the sort of like, how they grew up in a family.
Or if your higher self chooses, like, if it's karma is action, reaction must be opposite and equal. Karma is pressure. You know, if a child is born in a bad situation, and if they had that experience, if they were the how should I say this, the bad actor in the previous life, the only way to learn is to go through that experience. So it does give it not. It's obviously difficult for some people to, if a child's born with cancer and, if there's no reason for it. But if this is just your one life and that child's born with cancer, that doesn't really give a, it doesn't really, whereas if you say reincarnation gives you a reason for that okay, oh, I understand that's the mechanism behind it.
Yeah.
It's a potential explanation.
Hmm.
So, and if it's just your one life and you're just here, then that suffering is not understandable. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if God manifests as karma, and if God's like this incredible supercomputer, and every action was because you get hit by a car because 10 lives ago this thing happened. If it's all perfect and happening in some incredible cosmic, if we're in a classroom and all these lessons are happening to teach us and everything, then that is another way to gain understanding of it and to
Yeah,
yeah.
for
So
sure.
I didn't mention that to him because he wouldn't. I know he's not in all his studies. It's the brain is a mechanism, and although he did say something about consciousness existing outside the body, there's new studies for that. So I think
Wow.
in a couple of years, maybe psychologists come around to it. But,
Yeah, yeah, man, that's fascinating. No, I really could have talked for another like couple of
yeah.
hours, but then I was like, oh, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually kind of going late, so I didn't know how long you were able to talk.
Well, it's just keep it manageable.
Yeah, of course.
Got another podcast to record today as well. So.
Oh man, you for sure. Well, as far as the song goes, I mean, I feel like I have a ton of stuff to go off of. Like, how do you usually, is it just totally open-ended every time, like a different process with the
Yeah, let's just go for the best song. Just you write something, I'll write something, and send it back, and then you can go ahead and we want it to be in your style. It's going to be on your Spotify and on your,
yeah,
so it should be really in your something you have the final say.
yeah, yeah.
But if I come up with something great, I'll send it to you, and yeah, let's just do it, and then we can work on the production back and forth as well. It's just be a
Yeah.
collaboration, and
That's great. And the nice part about me coming home a little bit earlier is that I'll have access to like my piano, which
okay.
would be really good. So that's the one thing, like I can do the cool lo-fi acoustic thing when we're traveling, but like I really need that piano, I think, to have like some of
Yeah.
the broader like palette of sounds to work with. So that'll be nice. Like, and I'll be able to do that. And no promises, but I usually work pretty quick on this stuff.
Okay.
Just like, so, but yeah, but I'll be in touch and we'll send some ideas
All
up.
right, great. Well, the sooner we do the song, the sooner we can release it. You know, so I don't know what's going to happen by the time this gets out. Hopefully the war is a long memory. So we
Yeah,
can
I hope so.
let's make a positive song for the world peace. Yeah, and hopefully it won't be necessary.
Yeah, definitely.
But this has been great. You were a really good interview, Patrick. You really
Oh,
well done.
thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I don't know if I told you this, but in addition to the music stuff, like I interview people too for like, I do profiles and stuff like that for like magazines and,
Oh, I
so
didn't
I
know that.
interview people. Yeah. So I have some experience.
Oh, there you go. Well, I was thinking you're a natural, but actually you're just practice professional.
Well, yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, good luck with the song, and I'll catch you
All
later.
right. Yeah. Thanks so much. This was awesome.
No worries.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We didn't ask for this. Hot heads, cold hands and feet. Something switched on the light. We woke up and we stirred to life. Why? Oh, why? I didn't plan for this. The death of the life we shared. 2 candles in a single flame. My light dimmed when years pulled away. Why? Oh, why? I wonder how I'll get up. I wonder how I'll breathe. I wonder what you're doing now. And I wonder if you grieve. Oh, you never used to need much, and now you've got no need for me. But nothing's by design, and at least we got to try. My father bringing up his children in the light. We'd throw the ball around before church singles night. He hid his son from us and gave us all his shame. And when we'd ask too much, he tossed the ball away. I wonder how I'll get up. I wonder how I'll breathe. I wonder what you're doing now. And I wonder if you grieve. Oh, you never used to need much, and now you've got no need for me. But nothing's by design.